So everybody, thanks so much for listening to us. Whatever platform you're listening to us on, whether it's the podcast, the YouTube, or if you're listening to us on a different platform such as the radio, we thank you so much. If you are listening to us on an internet platform, please like, subscribe, and share. We greatly appreciate it. We're trying to get these interviews out to as many people as possible, so we appreciate that. We have Katherine Hostetler on, and she works well. I'll just start out. She works for the National Park Service. We've had somebody on here that's talked about the Flight 93 Memorial. So I think that's important. It was a huge time in our history. Katherine's going to go a little bit more into that as the public information officer at the Flight 93 Memorial. So, Katherine, first of all, thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it. We're looking forward to this information.
Thank you for having me today.
All right. So, Katherine, can you tell the people a little bit about you in general?
Absolutely. So as you said, my name is Katherine Hostetler. I am a park ranger at Flight 93 National Memorial, and I've been here for 6 years now. I started here as a seasonal ranger and worked my way up through the ranks. And I grew up in Somerset County, so this place is special to me geographically, but also, you know, part of my history and where I'm from. So I feel an attachment to the memorial itself as well. And the story here is an incredible one, but it's also, you know, something that happened in my backyard.
Right. So, we talk about this as in general. We talked about this with Adam on the last podcast about where you were when these attacks were going on. Can you go a little bit in depth about that?
Absolutely. So September 11th is a day that we will all remember, especially those of us that were alive.
Right.
We're now entering a time that there's an entire generation that's been born since September 11th, 2001. But for those of us who lived through that day, we know where we were at and what we were doing. And that's something referred to as a flashbulb memory. And for me, I was in high school, about 10 miles north of where Flight 93 would ultimately crash. And I remember, you know, being in class and watching what was unfolding on the news, because like most Americans that day, we were either glued to the television or the radio and just watching what was unfolding and just being memorized and in disbelief, as many people were.
We talk about the park service, and you talked about why you worked there in general. Now, throughout our last interview, we went a little bit more in depth about Flight 93, but I kind of want to talk about the programs that you offer as that public information officer. Can you speak about that when people go to the memorial, what they'll get?
So we offer daily programming in the summer at the memorial, and it really is during our peak season. So from Memorial Day to Labor Day, we're going to have daily programming. Of course, that schedule can change from summer to summer, what's offered and what times. But typically, you will run into a ranger at the visitor center, at the Memorial Plaza, and then also a handful of volunteers. So if you have questions, there will be a resource there for you to have your questions answered. And then also our ranger programs. And those are offered, of course, daily. And we focus on the story of Flight 93, and the story of Flight 93, that program is generally a half an hour long, and it will walk you through the day's events. And even though you remember September 11th, it's really great sometimes to just sit and hear that story being told to you, how it unfolds, the connection with Flight 93 in the greater context of September 11th, and then how the story unfolds aboard that plane and what happens, the phone calls that are made, and what actually happens in the last 6 minutes when that fight occurs aboard Flight 93.
They publicize a lot, and I know it was 20 years since Flight 93 and all the September 11th issues that had happened this year. I know President Biden was down there, and all that goes, and I want to go into that in depth. So, can you talk about the 20th anniversary? Was there a lot of people there How did all that go? I'm sure you guys were pretty swamped with all that going on.
The entire month of September was busy. I think that it kind of was expected in many ways because of the 20th observance of 9/11, but also, taking in the fact that we are just, in the midst of a pandemic, and being able to get outside, I think affected that as well. So September was actually one of our busiest months ever on record for visitation. And we saw almost 90,000 visitors in the month of September here at our small memorial. During the events for the 20th observance, those would have started the week before. We had programs, a speaker series that whole week, as well as on September 10th, our friends group put on the Luminaria, which we light lanterns and walk it down to the Wall of Names. We don't do that every year, just on the larger anniversaries. And we also had the Johnstown Symphony Orchestra playing for that. So that was a very well attended event. The event of the observance itself on September 11th was closed to the public this year, only open to family members. And we had a phenomenal turnout of family members, invited guests, dignitaries. And that it was an intimate ceremony in many ways, but it was also, a group of about 1,000 people that still were just to that private ceremony, which is available on our website. So if even, the regular person wasn't able to attend, everyone can watch it. It's available on our website. If you find the September 11th page, it is available for anyone to watch anytime. And then we had the Johnstown Symphony Orchestra play later that day, as well as speaker series. And over those 3 days, September 10th, 11th, and 12th, we had approximately 25,000 visitors physically to the site, which was incredible. And just the, honoring the courage and sacrifice of these 40 passenger and crew members and what they did. Also a number of different activities that had happened. One of the crowd favorites that was at the memorial over the observance was the chalk artists. And we had chalk artists from all over the country come and do portraits of the 40 passenger and crew members. And if you want to see those, we also have those available on our website, so you can take a look at the drawings that were done. They were incredible, and they're, works of art. They were done in chalk, so they're not made to last forever. And we had done several posts on our social media about them. Another one that was unique was the Tower of Light, and it connected, of course, the Pentagon and the Twin Towers. This year for the 20th observance, there were 4 towers of light, one for each of the Twin Towers, one for the Pentagon, and one here at Flight 93 National Memorial. So a lot of different things happening, and it attracted visitors literally from all over the world.
Is when you go into the visitor center, like for instance, say I walk in, or a listener or a viewer walks in, what will they see first? Will they see little trinkets of stuff in the plane? Will they see notes from the family members? What would they see?
So I'm going to take a step back before they enter the door, because I think one of the most impressive features of our visitor center are the walls that make the exterior. And those are the portal walls. And what they do is define the flight path of Flight 93. So it's an immersive experience. As you walk out of your car, you see these 2 enormous portal walls, and they're defining the trajectory of Flight 93. You would have followed this black sidewalk straight ahead, and that would have been ultimately the crash site. As you walk out, you'll see an overlook. You can look down, see the crash site, the Wall of Names below the visitor center. In between those 2 concrete walls is the visitor center itself, and that's going to define your experience. Really, it takes you through chronologically the order of everything that happens that day, and then focuses on the story of Flight 93. There's so much symbolism as well tied into those walls. There's diagonal lines throughout the memorial, and those, of course, are symbolic of the hemlock trees, which are right in back of the crash site. That tells the story of what happens here. They are impacted by thousands of gallons of jet fuel just getting launched from that aircraft when it crashes. And that's where a lot of the evidence is recovered from during the investigation that happens in the 13 days following the events of September 11th.
So you guys do put on a lot of events. You kind of went into a little bit of detail about that as far as that goes. What is your personal favorite event that you put on?
Man. So even though we do a lot of events, around anniversaries, all of that, there's, also the day by day, the everyday stories are so important. As a park ranger, my job here is to tell the story. So I will humbly say our everyday ranger programs are very important because that's helping the average person learn what happened here.
Right.
And it's every day. It's not just on an anniversary. So if you're not here on September 11th, you can get that story just by sitting on the benches down by the flagpole at the Memorial Plaza and listening to a ranger or a volunteer tell the story of Flight 93 and kind of get more out of that experience than just walking the trails and seeing the Memorial Plaza, but also, hearing the story and being part of the story when you're here during a program. So I think that every day is just as important as one of the big events that we hold here. One of the big events that we offer every year is also reforestation. And I think symbolically is an important part of the story here because it's moving on to the future. And as we reforest parts of this site that had been surface mined, this very scarred landscape, and it parallels our country on September 11th, how scarred our country still is. And with every seed that we plant in the future, will grow into this beautiful tree and, continue the story as well. So it's kind of a beautiful metaphor and how it will grow and continue to prosper.
But when people go to the memorial rather, everyone sees different things while they're at the memorial. But there are things, very small things, that people miss. What do you feel like people miss when they go to the memorial?
Oh, wow, that's a hard one. Can I do it in two parts?
Yeah, fair enough.
All right. So I think just the smallest details are often overlooked. You see the big picture, you see the concrete, the marble, the granite, you see those things. And for me, one of my favorite architectural pieces, and it's something I mentioned earlier, are the design motifs for the hemlock. And in the concrete walls of the visitor center, there is a texture, and it is reminiscent of hand-hewn beams. What it actually is 6 different rubber molds that were taken from a barn in eastern Pennsylvania. They're placed into the concrete, and it's making all of our concrete at the memorial that are, architectural features at the Memorial Plaza, the shelter, the portal walls of the visitor center, the entrance sign. It is all textured, made to look like hand-hewn wood. And, you think of the crash site, the trees that are on fire right in back of the actual physical crash site are the hemlock trees. The eastern hemlock, or our state tree here in Pennsylvania. They build a lot of the barns that you see scattered on the Pennsylvania countryside. And when you think of Pennsylvania, you think of these red barns as you're driving through. And one of the most famous images of the site, taken about a minute after the plane had gone down, it's taken a mile away from the site from a resident, and it's this red barn with the smoke plume rising above it. And what builds those red barns? Those hemlock trees. So this theme is continuing throughout the memorial, and where investigators will find a significant or substantial amount of evidence is found inside of those hemlock trees. They bring in tree climbers, they climb the trees, they find, oh my gosh, more evidence than they anticipated, I think, originally. And you think about what's going on in New York and at the Pentagon, they're going to recover more evidence quickly here because we don't have search and rescue efforts, unfortunately. They realize almost immediately that there's no survivors. So the hemlock trees, for me, I love the environment and the story as well. And then a new addition to the memorial, within the last year, we installed the wind chimes in the Tower of Voices. And I don't think people necessarily miss them. What I think that sometimes happens is that we don't have enough wind, believe it or not, to move the wind chimes. So what they miss is actually getting to hear them. visiting on a nice sunny day, usually is when it's not windy.
Right, right.
And it's the best time to visit, it's a beautiful sunny day. Visiting, when it's kind of dreary and rainy and windy is not necessarily the best time you want to like plan a vacation, but if you want to hear those wind chimes, changing weather patterns are the best days to have substantial wind. And we need an average of between 10 and 15 miles an hour because the wind chimes are very heavy. They weigh about 100 pounds a piece. So, I mean,
Wow.
it's going to take a pretty good gust of wind. A light breeze is not going to move those wind chimes. And I just put a clip on Facebook this past week of the cacophony of sound that is produced on a windy day. We had sustained 30-mile-an-hour winds, and you could sit in your car in the parking lot. And that's actually the best place to hear them when they're producing sound because the acoustic shadow, right? The sound carries, and it's going to sound different underneath the tower than it would farther back. And it's incredible to hear the wind chimes themselves. So visit on a windy day.
This quick question. I know you guys do have the web camera. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that there's no sound on that. So they wouldn't be able to. Oh, there is
You just
sound.
have to uncheck the mute button at the bottom. It's through our partners. It's through earthcam.com. So just earthcam.com. And the video will pull up. Just make sure you uncheck the little, the speaker symbol at the bottom. And I don't want to try to describe what the speaker symbol looks like. I think we all know what it looks like, but it's hidden at the corner. And that happens to so many people. It is live feed. It has sound on it to the degree that if I'm up there as a park ranger talking to a group, you can usually hear what that park ranger is saying. The microphones are really, really good up there. And it's a 4K camera up with the EarthCam. So it's a good camera. It takes quality sound. You can actually zoom in from your home computer and kind of like mess with the camera lens and, see some, like, turn the camera a little bit and see what's going on, how many visitors we have. And it's a great way to check out if the tower is producing sound.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you if you could hear it, but I guess you answered that, so that's great. So
would you like me to pull it up now for you and see if we can hear if it's
okay, fair enough.
Can you see the tower?
You're right.
All right, so down here is the microphone, and it's actually creating sound. I don't know if you can hear it. I'll turn up my volume. But it is creating some sound. I can hear it right now. And then you can also, it went to a different video. I didn't realize it was going to do that. You can turn the camera a little bit or zoom in. There we go.
But with the last two questions, what do you hope people learn from the memorial while they're there, and also even just listening to this interview?
Wow. So one, I want to thank you so much for having me on here and be able to talk about a place that I love and a story that I think is so important, not just for, the current generation or the people that lived through September 11th, but also for future generations. Right. And know that you can make a difference. I think is one of the biggest takeaways from the Flight 93 story is that, the average person can make a difference. And these were just 40 ordinary, normal people traveling for 40 ordinary, normal reasons. And they found themselves in an impossible situation on September 11th. And instead of, just sitting there and doing nothing, they rose to the challenge by making a simple phone call. And by making phone calls, they learn from their friends, their loved ones, and what's going on, and piece together that story. They work together as complete strangers and decide to do something. So I think one of the biggest takeaways from the Flight 93 story is that you can make a difference. And the 40 people aboard Flight 93 did that day and saved countless lives in Washington, D.C. And I think there's a lot of people that were in Washington that day that will be forever grateful for the people that were on Flight 93 that day. For this interview, I hope that it inspires you to make the trip to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It is not, easy to get to. It's off the beaten path, but I encourage everyone to come out and see our memorial, hear the Tower of Voices if it's a windy day, visit the visitor center, walk our trails. We have 2 beautiful trails here at the memorial, and see the wall of names. Just seeing their names engraved in marble, really just pulls it all together. And then looking down the flight path and seeing the crash site, and learning who they were as individuals, as just regular human beings, and telling that story and passing it on to someone.
Can we just end this on hope? And any interview, whether I do it, whether it's about politics, sports, a lifestyle thing, we always ask to end about something hopeful because of the political gobbledygook in our country and COVID and mental health issues in our country. It's pretty tragic, the state that we're in right now. So can you give the audience a little bit of a message on hope?
So it's my hope that we take the story of what happens aboard Flight 93 on September 11, 2001, the courage and sacrifice that the 40 passenger and crew members made that day, and tell the future generations that are going to come through this country, live in the entire world, of what you can do by, just saying something, just, going above a little bit can really change the world. And the sacrifice of these 40 people really changed our country, the world that day. And in the last 20 years, we've had over 75 million people born. That our job is to tell that story and continue that story so people remember.
I agree 100%. So as we go toward the end of the interview, Katherine, can you tell people where they can find more about Flight 93 online, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it may be?
Absolutely. So the best place to learn about Flight 93 National Memorial is our website. It is www.nps.gov/FLNI. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So you can follow us there if you'd like as well. We're very active on our social media, and we continue telling the story every day there.
All right. Again, for people that are listening, this was Katherine Hostetler here on Fire Breathing Rob. She is the public information officer at the Flight 93 National Memorial over in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. I think it's definitely worth, stopping by if you can. Nice little summer vacation, maybe in the winter if you want to go when there's no crowds. Anytime they're open. So I would check it out. But Katherine, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.